What's going on, guys? Evan the Dark Souls 2 enthusiast here for another Dark Souls 2 gameplay commentary. And this time we're going to be doing a little Force of the Giants and some other odds ends as we clean up some random enemies early in the game I chose to skip due to basically their difficulty relative to their rewards. I'm not at the point in the Dark Souls 2 life cycle yet where I'm tackling challenges just for the sake of being challenged. I'm still trying to sort of master the base game so that I can maybe go for the challenge rings or do a speed run. I don't know where I'm going, but that's currently right now it's more about item memorization and methodologies for beating bosses, things like that. You know, Dark Souls 2, we're definitely past the 101 stuff, but definitely the maybe say learning the Dark Souls advanced strategies for PvE, and then we'll ultimately finish with, you know, the ultra mastery of PvE, which I think I had in Dark Souls 1. I could probably successfully go through all of Dark Souls 1 with 0 to 1 deaths if I played without rushing, but that's neither here nor there. So I'm going to take a minute to tell you guys what's going to go on in this video, because it's an hour long, and I want players and viewers to know, like, so what exactly am I watching here? So, as always, there will be a video timeline in the description of the video where you can link to specific events in the upload that might be relevant to you if you're not really interested in my conversation or what I have to say about Dark Souls, but you're just sort of more interested in the walkthrough portion of it. I do try to hit every item drop. I might miss some from time to time, but I hit, you know, almost every item in an area every time, and you know, I think I show good, easy-to-use strategies for beating most enemies and things like that. So that's my normal spiel at the start of a video. So when we come up to timeline events in the description, I'll break from whatever I'm talking about in the extraneous commentary to talk about, you know, that particular moment. So, like, you know, for this video, it's 7 minutes and 30 seconds. We fight the old Dragon Slayer. At 15:30, I reveal how to reach the bonfire shortcut in the Force of the Giants. At the 24-minute mark, we'll talk a little bit about the Pate storyline so people know how they're going to get the most out of Pate and the best drops and things like that. At 32:30, we'll fight the Lost Giant. At 50:45, we'll fight the Pursuer, and there'll be a special bonus during the Pursuer fight. And no, it's not killing him with the crossbow. It's something a little more special than that. So anyway, and at 57:30, we'll see the Drangleic set, which will just about wrap up the commentary this time. To fill in some of the gaps for, you know, an hour-long commentary, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Mega Mule, which is something that, you know, as time goes on, I'm having less of an opinion on. I feel less strongly about it, but I still feel strongly enough that I think I could talk about it at length here. So that'll be that. And we're also going to talk about adaptability and agility again, because I'm getting messages where you know, there's some confusion surrounding the two, but I just want to let everyone know that confusion is in the community in general. It's not just people viewing this channel or viewing Dark Souls videos. So, quick aside here, up ahead you'll see that little coffin in the water. That is the famous and arguably infamous sex change coffin that a lot of players sleep in, because they're like, what does this do? Oh, I'm suddenly a woman, or I'm suddenly a man. So that's just something to be aware of. That is the sex change coffin, so if you're ever looking to change the sex of your character, that's where you do it. And another thing I want to talk about is NPC requirements, which I've always been against since the early Demon Souls era, and I'll talk about that you know, a little later as well. But at the moment, I'm going to sort of break into the actual game commentary and get past the introduction. So, last but not least, the channel updates. Being more regular with my Dark Souls uploads, I know I've only been more regular for a little over a week now, if even that, so before I sort of win back the faith of the community, I have to definitely upload a lot more than I was for a while, but I think I'm setting a good tone, and as always, I'm not going to make any promises, but I am going to say that I'm enjoying my Dark Souls 2 content, so I don't think it'll be as much of a challenge to keep putting it up as it was in the past. I mean, well, Dark Souls 1 was an amazing game. I had done, you know, thousands of hours on that game, and I just, you know, couldn't move another inch. I just needed to play something different. So, anyway, let's go ahead and jump into my first topic of discussion, which is the whole agility, adaptability thing and stuff like that, and to talk about stats and is it worth leveling and what that looks like. And at this point I want to preface, this is all preliminary data at the time of this upload. We don't know the optimal level of agility. We don't know the optimal level of adaptability as it relates to agility, so there's a lot of unknowns with that, and we might even need to wait for the PC data dump to really see what that looks like. But I'll tell you what I can and what I know, and I have looked into this a lot and talked to some, as they say, community elders or people that have spent a lot of time trying to figure out the secrets behind this. So, basically, and even this statement might be considered unconfirmed, but in my opinion it's confirmed. So, players have done tests concerning iframes, invincibility frames, and things like that, and it appears as though as you raise your agility level, your character has a greater ability to roll. He rolls quicker, he's more responsive in his actions, things like that. Things you think agility would do. So to a degree, I think that it makes a lot of sense. Once again, though, the jury's still out. A lot of people call it a placebo effect, where agility is doing very little to nothing. Sort of, it would be the new resistance at that point. Agility would be the new resistance, worthless stat. I don't know if that's true. I'm currently playing a cleric character, in this upload where I have 4 adaptability, and I do feel a little more sluggish than I was playing my mage, who had, more adaptability and over 100 agility. So there might be something to it. There's been some testing videos on YouTube that I will link in the description. But that said, I'll tell you what I think I know. So I think since we don't have knowledge for what will be optimal and just what impacts adaptability and agility have, I want to talk about the agility I would shoot for and how you raise agility. Agility can be raised through both attunement and adaptability. Adaptability will raise agility more quickly, attunement will raise it more slowly, but of course attunement has the added benefit of increasing your casting speed and giving you more spells to cast. So it actually creates what I consider to be a pretty interesting dilemma when you're building a character, because if you're a caster, leveling attunement seems like a no-brainer. Like, I definitely level attunement. Why would I not? It governs all these useful things, and attunement, in my opinion, is not always as interesting as players sometimes make it out to be. What I mean by that is, there is a ring in Dark Souls 2 that gives you 4 attunement slots on your character. And so, if you have, say, 16 attunement, which is, in my opinion, the break point that's most worth stopping at, you have, I think, 3 spell slots at 16 attunement. So you have 3 spell slots plus that ring. That's 7 attunement slots. And unless you're a pure caster, that's way more than you need. So if you're leveling attunement past that, I would say it's either because you're trying to drop a ring slot and you don't want to wear that ring, which will make a lot of sense to me since there's other rings that are so good. But I'm going to break here for the Dragon Slayer fight, and we'll get back to this when I return. And we're back. Maybe not the most impressive old Dragon Slayer fight, but nevertheless, that's a really easy way to beat him. If you just circle strafe around him, you typically won't run into as many problems as I did. The iframes on rolls, not what they used to be, so you need to sort of be careful, I think, and how you try to roll smooth attacks. And at this point, if you have... Most players will probably have a 100% physical resistance shield, which trivializes the entire fight. As long as you have a decent shield, that fight is a no-brainer. But because I have all the garbage shield, it's a little more challenging. But anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, which was the whole basically we're talking about attunement and its viability as a stat. And I mean, I think it's a much better stat than it used to be. I mean, at this point, raising your attunement will give you more casts of your spells, it will give you more spell slots, and it will cause you to cast faster, and it'll raise your agility to boot. So I think my preliminary observation is that attunement's a pretty valuable stat, but at the same time, I think it almost falls into a luxury stat. I think any character that's going to use pyromancy or magic routinely should go up to 16 attunement. You know, frankly, just for the sake of 3 spell slots, I think those points are really well spent, and the added casting speed for whatever magic you do decide to use is pretty nice. So the question becomes, when do you take attunement past that? Well, ignoring arguments like player preference and things like that, which is true for almost anything in a Souls game, you know, I think unless you're a pure caster, 16 is where you stop. Because ultimately, if you're looking to carry a crap ton of spells and be a pure caster, you know, raising attunement is great because it's going to be your primary source of damage. I mean, if you intend to emphasize your magic over your weapon, then attunement's probably the most important stat. I mean, I would definitely consider a legitimate build to be a maxed out dagger, because the dagger's backstab damage in Dark Souls 2 is pretty wild. So a maxed out dagger, or raw dagger, you know, a min-max dagger for your build, coupled with a lot of attunement, and I think that would be a viable build. It's not what I would pursue. I think having a good, strong weapon is a little better, but absolutely. You'll see we've skipped to the Cardinal Tower here. There was some footage edited out there because I kind of monkeyed around and ran around the Tower of Flame there for kicks, which I edited out of the video for, you know, purposes of time. But anyway, so if you've got 16 attunement, that's, you know, 3 spell slots and some additional casting speed, and you know, I think that's about right for support magic slash, you know, lightning spears and things like that. Like, unless you're the pure caster, there's just no need. And keep in mind, you can swap rings out so easily that if you ever needed a lot of spell slots, you could always equip your attunement ring, which I believe is the Southern Ritual Band +2 or the Northern Ritual Band. It's one of the ritual bands, and it's available in New Game Plus or with BONFIRE aesthetics. So that's my take on attunement as a stat. So I think relying on attunement to raise your agility exclusively is a silly decision unless you're a pure caster. Those are just my thoughts. Some people are advocating you dump attunement. Dump means put a lot of points into it, and or put extra points into it. That way you can raise your casting speed, things like that. And I think there's an argument there, but for me, who's playing sort of a more melee-centric build, I can't say I recommend taking attunement past 16 unless you have a specific plan. And obviously, builds can be tailored to whatever they want. Particularly right now, we don't have sort of the optimized builds available to us yet because, frankly, no one knows what they are. And I have a feeling FromSoft is going to do some patches to Dark Souls 2, which, as always, will cause some character reconfiguration. So we'll see what happens with that. But anyway, that's sort of the attunement in a nutshell. And yes, it does raise your agility. So if you're looking to raise your agility, that is one way to do so. The other stat, which is adaptability, which contributes the greatest to your agility. That's a whole other thing, and I'll talk a little bit about that now. I just want to say I don't really know the table for how much, because there is an interaction between adaptability as it compares to attunement, and I'm not sure the exact rate of growth on agility between these two. No one's really mapped that out yet. There's no calculator available to my knowledge. Now, if one of those calculators is available and has become available, I've just missed the news, please send me a private message so I can put a video up about it on the channel, because I think it would make character creation a lot less stressful for perfectionists and min-maxers. But that's, once again, a different conversation. So the way adaptability works is, as you raise adaptability, it will raise agility, and it will raise your poison resistance, and resistances to everything, essentially. And raising poison resistance is actually relevant in PvP and PvE, because a lot of enemies in PvE will poison you, and in PvP, people are loving the poison. Adding poison to weapons is very common right now, particularly because poison is a little harder to cure in combat than it used to be. I mean, you can still pop a grass or a divine blessing if you're a Mega Mule guy, but either way, it's still Elizabeth's mushroom, etc. Either way, it's still more viable in PvP because the poison buildup can be extremely quick. I mean, Twin Blades can poison you in basically one combo or less. So Katana, same thing. So poison's far more viable. So having additional poison resist, not a bad thing. I mean, something I would consider as a legitimate reason to, level adaptability. Whereas in the past, I would never see you raise a stat for resistance to a particular thing. It's just not worth it. Raising adaptability will raise your agility. in a noticeable way. So, in my opinion, overall, adaptability will wind up being a worthwhile stat. I don't think it's going to be resistance, which, for those of you who didn't play Dark Souls 1, resistance was literally a useless stat. Every point you spent into resistance actually was completely wasted. But, you know, beyond that, we'll break. This is a timeline moment here. So, if you can get this dude up here to throw a fireball into these barrels, it will destroy this wall, and you can reach the bonfire in the Cardinal's Tower. I mean, you don't have to do it that way. Another option is you can just firebomb it yourself, but I would definitely say it's fancier to have him do it. Plus, you don't waste a firebomb. Now, I carry some firebombs on me because there's numerous parts in the game where I found fireballs to be useful for accessing secret rooms and defeating certain enemies. And you see the guard break there at work, but I didn't do the counter hit very well, but no matter. So he bombs it here. We miss again. So on and so forth. The trick is not to panic. You have to wait. Throw the high arc. It's not hard at all. So that brings down the wall. You can get back to the merchant here. You can get back to the bonfire. Things like that. That merchant will move once you down the boss in this area. So it doesn't change much, but it does put her in Majula. So if you need to buy items from her, she'll be available there. One thing about that is she does sell the items of any NPC you kill, for the most part. So if you kill an NPC, you can get their gear from her body. Now, I want to throw out fair warning. There is 2 NPCs that actually have achievements tied to quote-unquote inheriting their gear, which is basically following a little quest line for them. Killing them and buying the gear does not complete the achievement because, you know, brutally murdering someone, then buying their scavenged remains from a filthy merchant doesn't really qualify as inheriting. But I know some people are confused about why they didn't get the achievement. That is the reason you did not get the achievement. You actually have to inherit it. So this is going to be not my proudest moment here. Kind of get mobbed by 2 people. Once again, typical Souls lessons. When you don't respect the trash mobs, they will kill you. Particularly true in New Game Plus, where enemies get a substantial growth. Or if you use a bonfire aesthetic in an area. So, going to die here in a minute, and it's going to be all the shame. So I should have just went in and killed him right there, but I panicked, and because I don't have a 100% physical resist shield, I got chipped out. Kind of felt like PvP versus a Moonlight Greatsword, where they just kind of slowly grind you out, you know? But anyway, moving right along. I think that, well, back to the adaptability. So I've already said, once again, it raises poison resistance. It raises your agility in the most profound way possible in character creation. And it has a relationship with endurance where for each point of endurance you have as it relates to adaptability, so if you have, you'll get natural poise. So the easiest way to explain that is if you have 5 endurance and 5 adaptability, you have 5 poise built into your character. So that could be pretty cool, you know, to help when you're finalizing character designs, you know, once we know poise breakpoints, if there is poise breakpoints in this game, because that's another thing we'll talk about in this video that I didn't elaborate on earlier, is we're going to talk a little bit about poise and what the failure it looks to be. But once again, we're early in the game's life cycle, so all this is just speculative / based upon my own experiences. I haven't got the hard research on it yet, as much as I've looked for it. So, once again, you know, when the 2 sets are equal, you get that much poise. So, since most people are going to cap endurance at the minimum of 20 and possibly more, you know, you could theoretically get a build with 20 poise if you took adaptability to 20. But I think taking adaptability to 20 is silly because, once again, the breakpoints on agility are not well known. And some people claim there really isn't much difference at all in the roles. I've experienced some differences. I can tell you that agility will give you a noticeable difference in how quickly your character drinks the Estus flask, which is actually pretty big in PvE. You know, everyone takes those hits in those boss fights where you need to flask up, and yeah, it makes a big difference for that. You're going to see me fail. This fight with the Pursuer is optional. You don't have to fight him here at all, and there's frankly no real benefit to doing so. But I decided to do it for fun, for the challenge. I mean, the bonfire is right there, and he absolutely crushes me. I mean, I have downed him on this roof before, but I guess without the video upload, you know, who would believe me and who really cares? But there's much greater challenges on the Dark Souls from the Dark Souls community. But one thing I do want to take an aside here to mention poise here, right after I finish up agility, so keep that in mind. With agility, it looks like it's severely diminishing returns, at least from the tests that have been done and from my personal experiences. You know, after 100 agility, things just seem to completely drop off into no usefulness, and in my experience, 93 to 95 agility makes enough of a difference that my rolls and my flasks seem to be about at the time I would expect as it relates to Dark Souls 1. But that's the thing with adaptability and agility, and it seems a lot of it's personal preference. Like, what are you comfortable with? You need to get your roll speed to what you're comfortable with. And as for iframes, it's not confirmed if there is additional invincible frames in a roll. I personally believe that there are, but I don't believe they're huge. I have not been able to dodge some attacks without agility. Now, I've been told that that essentially is placebo effect, but I don't think so. I think because we don't have hard research, using your own personal experiences is relevant. And I would have to say my personal experience is that faster agility, more agility actually helps with rolling correctly. So my thing with that is it looks like 93 to 100 agility is the sweet spot for rolling, at least in most of the preliminary tests that have been done in my experience. It definitely looks like if you get some outrageous amount of agility, it doesn't make a huge difference in rolling and things like that. So it's not going to be an OP stat. It's probably not even a mandatory stat. In my experience, the attacks that would justify super high agility to avoid, you could have just backed away from them. It's hard to explain that, but essentially it feels like a lot of attacks that it might enable you to roll through, you didn't have to work so hard to avoid. Like, you could have just rolled in the correct direction, or you could have just maybe used a shield, all sorts of options. But overall, I think until we know more, and likely after we know more, do not go over 100 agility. So in order to reach that number, until we have breakpoints and things like that so we can better plan our characters and spreadsheets, Dark Souls spreadsheet wars, I would advise that players strongly consider maxing out their attunement to the level they think they want it on their character, and then just sort of putting extra points into adaptability until they get the number they want. But do your attunement first, because it's the stat that's more reliable, frankly. So you should prioritize your attunement growth over your adaptability growth, at least until we know breakpoints. You just pre-plan everything you want. So, and before we drop the topic of adaptability, I want to just kind of throw out there, I hate this stat. I mean, I like the premise, but I think the agility thing is just awful. I think that we don't know how much of an impact it has, but if it has any impact at all on rolling, which I'm almost positive it does, I absolutely hate it. I absolutely thought having roll speeds as a constant was a great design choice. I mean, I like the fast roll, the mid roll, and the slow roll, and I like the... And this is definitely, by the way, this is definitely worth using a Pharaoh's Lockstone on here, because it will allow you to see an invisible wall, as they all do, many of them do. And doing so will allow you to access a Titanite slab, which for me is definitely worth it. Early in the game, the Pharaoh's Lockstones feel a lot like a very limited resource, and they are. But as you get through the game, you'll actually acquire way more than you need, because most things you open had stuff that was never worth opening anyway. So you'll see those in those walkthroughs. The ones I skip for a reason. And this clothery ring for stamina growth, it will be replaced by better rings a little further into the game, but in the interim it's really good. Now you'll see me miss something here. This locked door, the way to open it is if you strike it with your mace or whatever weapon you have several times, the undead will come through and open it for you, allowing you to get a large Titanite shard. That's very significant, because that shard will allow you to take your weapon up to the next sort of upgrade plane much earlier than if you naturally acquired it. So that's something to think about. Definitely pick that up. It's just an oversight on my part. I came back and got it later off camera, so I'm aware of that item, and I want to make everyone watching these videos be aware also. Okay, so this starts the Pate quest. I get a lot of questions about these NPC quests with people concerned they're going to screw them up. This one's really easy. So with Pate, all you need to do to meet his conditions is talk to him after and before you go through that gateway into this alleged ambush. So once you go further enough in that area, the gate will shut behind you and you will be trapped and forced to fight your way out. So to do the Pate storyline, you just need to talk to him before you go in and talk to him after. Really simple. Also, talking to Pate will allow you to access the white soapstone so that you can start getting summoned to other wards to fight some bosses and things like that. So worth doing. Be aware of it. It also lets you get some items in here. There's some hidden walls and stuff like that. Definitely worth doing. I mean, you're playing a Souls game anyway. Exploration's all part of the fun, so explore all the areas, and completing his quest line will allow you to equip his armor and stuff, and I'll talk more about that later. But at this point, so you don't miss it, just understand that to inherit Pate's armor set, which isn't an achievement, but it is worth inheriting. To inherit Pate's armor set, you need to summon him for the boss fight with the Lost Giant. Which is fine. I mean, the Lost Giant's very easy, so you don't have to worry about Pate dying. A lot of these NPC gear quests require you to summon the NPC to help you in several boss fights, which is awful, because you summon a phantom that doubles the HP of the boss, and frankly, the NPC phantoms, by and large, essentially suck, and keeping them alive can actually be exhausting. And I'll talk more about ways to keep them alive. There's tricks of the trade that you can keep them alive, but even when you know those tricks and keeping them alive isn't that challenging, having them there just makes bosses more challenging, and I'm not all about intentionally making things more challenging for myself, at least not this early in the game. So I dread the fights where I have to summon those NPCs. Just added pressure, you know. Anyway, wrapping up the conversation about agility, I won't belabor the point, but I think it's an idiotic stat, personally. I sort of like the premise, I just don't like the execution. I think that agility governing the speed that you flask, the speed that you cast, things like that, those are all niche things, and I think that, you know, having a stat that can raise and govern those niche speeds, govern the speeds of some of those niche actions, I think that's a great idea. I think it's a well thought out stat, but the fact that it seems to influence rolling, I think that's silly, because rolling is so important to the essence of Dark Souls. I mean, even if you're a heavy knight, some attacks is just, the game is just destined to have you roll for, and I think having a constant is a great thing there, because I like practicing rolling. I like becoming sort of proficient at rolling, and having different roll speeds based on my character builds, I don't think that's going to be the kind of thing that adds diversity to builds. I don't think it's going to be the kind of thing that adds diversity to the player experience. I think it's going to be sort of more of an obnoxious, boring thing that nobody wants to level. And, oh, sorry guys, that's my cell phone. So those are my thoughts on the subject. All in all, not real thrilled about how the agility thing was handled. I think it will also stay in the game. I don't think it's the kind of thing that will be patched out because it's unpopular, because most players don't have a problem with it. This is maybe more of an Ego Xeno thing, but I like roll speeds to be consistent across all characters. I like that to be a constant and sort of a measure of skill. In my mind, it just made sense to make that a constant. Governing casting speed, governing Estus chugging, governing maybe using throwing knives, which I don't even think it influences. It doesn't seem to influence the speed at which throwing knives are thrown in my experience, or things like that. But having a stat to improve those things, I think, could actually unlock new character builds. But I don't think having breakpoints for good rolling is smart. And I hope someone in the community can step it up and maybe find a data dump or do something to sort of reveal the breakpoints on agility, because frankly, I'd like to minimize it as much as possible, because I can't stand something that changes my roll speed. So I think that's going to be my new gripe for Dark Souls 2. That and Soul Memory, but we've already talked about that. My gripe for Dark Souls 1 was the world tendency, and that just killed the replayability for the game for me. And in this game, and Second Chance was awful as well. This game, I think it's going to wind up not having as much of an impact on me, but I'm going to have a negative impact by the moronic Soul Memory system. And that's compounded with this agility stat, which I just can't stand. But like I said, my negativity aside, I think it is a useful stat. Definitely considered 93 to 100 agility. Anything beyond that, and I have not seen a measurable difference, and not many other players have either. Fair warning: if you decide to do some research on your own, you are going to get the gambit. The absolute gambit of player perspectives, all the way from it does nothing, it's a placebo, all the way to, it's the most important stat, get tons of it. I can assure you, I think like most stats in the Dark Souls game, balance is the trick. Gouging any stat typically isn't worth it unless you're doing something very specific. And I can't imagine a build where gouging that stat would be worthwhile, that being adaptability to raise agility. So, that's my 2 cents on the issue. I do kind of like the direction it was trying to go, which was, the constant battle of mobility versus survivability and raw HP. Raw HP versus the ability to preserve HP by not taking attacks. I like that conceptually. It's just the execution was poor, in my opinion. So I won't belabor the point any more than that. So we still have a little bit of time before the next, couple minutes before the next, as they say, the next timeline moment. So let's take a sec here to talk about poise and how that's looking. Dark Souls 1, poise was immediately noticeable. I mean, once you got enough poise and got your breakpoints on poise, poise was known to be, pretty fantastic. It became one of the most defining elements of PvP in Dark Souls 1, which was poise. And maybe to the point poise was too good. I mean, them pointing it back in this game seems like a great idea. But it doesn't look like poise does nearly as much as it used to. That's the part that's sort of frightening, is it's poise is starting to look somewhere between useful and useless. And I know that's a huge spectrum for things to be almost one or the other, but I'm going to explain where I'm going with this. So I've done a little bit of testing on my own, nothing fancy trying to find the breakpoints or anything like that, but I put on a little bit of poise and found I was still getting stunned on the first hit from a dagger or a katana or a short sword or a falchion, things like that. So it's like, wow, maybe you just need a lot of poise in this game to get impact. So I threw on like all the heavy armor and got a ton of poise, and I still got stunned on the first hit from the dagger. So whatever poise is, it looks like you might need a crap ton of it to make it worthwhile, or it might not be worthwhile at all. I have not tested it thoroughly, but this relates back to the adaptability argument, because leveling adaptability to get poise, until we know breakpoints and until we know specifically how poise works, that might be a kind of a wish upon a star thing. Now, and I think that's where adaptability might be great to tweak builds. So later on in the game's life cycle, when we determine if poise is useful, and if it is useful, what those breakpoints are, that would be good for your build if you're one of those spreadsheet warriors like me, where you plan out your character all the way to the armor at the start of the game based on the vigor you're going to have. So if you needed X poise for a breakpoint, you couldn't slide on a piece of armor you didn't want to that would get you to that poise. You could maybe build in adaptability, and it would be worth your time. So that's my thoughts on poise. Some players have reported to me that poise sort of gives you hyper armor in the fighting game community, and what hyper armor means is attacks can't be interrupted. So if you're not making an attack and someone hits you, it'll stun you. If you're in an attack with poise and you hit them, you'll just keep swinging. So if that's the case, it might be useful for PvP if you have big weapons. Now, at that point, I'd still say be on the low end of the usefulness spectrum, I think. But if that is the case, there is a purpose for it, so that you don't keep getting your big Zawandier swings disrupted by dagger pokes. So that's my thoughts on the subject. And that's really all I know about poise right now. I don't know if the community has found out more and I'm just missing it, but I'm basically lurking on like 4 forums at the same time. I mean, I'm all over Reddit, I'm over GameFAQs, and I'm all over the wikis trying to bring the most useful information I can to my commentaries, and frankly, to my own playing experience. I mean, nothing's more important to me than this research right now as I try to make my characters correctly, because I also think this is very important to know to inform the soul level argument. But we'll talk on the soul level discussion once again right after this fight here. I like to be silent for the boss fights for environmental nostalgia. So we summoned Pate here for his quest, but I'll see you guys in a minute. Guys, and we're back. That's the benefit of a Faith build. You just throw lightning spears at all the bosses and simplify your thinking. You know, easy mode, right? But the last giant, he's almost a tutorial boss. He's very easy. Just stay at his feet. You might take a death or two if you're new to the series. Veterans will probably find him completely unchallenging. But keeping Pate alive isn't that difficult because the last giant doesn't do that much damage, and Pate seems to have the good sense to block a lot behind his big tower shield. And Pate's shield's actually a very powerful shield, so Pate's one of the NPCs that is easier to keep alive. Too bad you only have to summon him once, as opposed to some of these other NPCs you have to summon, you know, a crap load of times, like 3 times for their quest line. But anyway, before we wrap things up with the Mega Mule discussion, which is a sore subject for me, it's becoming more sore with time, I want to talk about the soul level thing briefly, as it relates to the agility and adaptability. We don't know how important that stat is for builds. You know, and I think that the soul level choice needs to be sort of balanced against how important that is. So if adaptability is the kind of stat where it's more of a preference than a need, I think that the soul level should stay around 130, maybe 135. That's just my preliminary thoughts, as always. You know, in no means expert knowledge here, but you know, obviously you're here to hear my opinion. I would, or at least you're forced to hear it if you're still watching the video. I would argue that, you know, if adaptability is not an essential trait, then, you know, let's just keep the soul level lower, because magic is already very powerful in this game, much more powerful than it used to be. Now, there are counters, so I'm not going to even suggest it's overpowered. I'm just saying magic is very, very effective, and as a result, I don't think spellcasters are going to need crap loads of stats to make it work. I think the biggest players pushing for a higher soul cap are, you know, the hexers, because hex is, you know, kind of stat demanding, because you have to level faith and intelligence equally to make hex work, because hex will scale off the lowest stat of the two. So if you have, you know, 50 intelligence, you know, it won't be that great. Another thing is, I don't think players realize how common Simpleton and Skeptic's Spice become later in the game, and how easily farmable they are with Bonfire Ascetics or just New Game Plus cycles. And as a result, meeting the requirements of like some of these spells which are outrageous, of like 65 intelligence and 65 faith and stuff like that, you know, hex builds, hex players, and some of the better hexes also require a very high intelligence or very high faith. So hex players sort of feel like they're getting gimped by low soul levels because they don't have the opportunity to, you know, unlock their most powerful spells and stuff, because they can't justify, you know, pumping the stats that high to use those skills. But really, in my opinion, no one should be taking their intelligence past 50, even on a dedicated intelligence build, because that is what the spices are for. The whole spice system really changes that dynamic. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's practical to have like a 4 intelligence character then go all in on all the spice. Like, I think that's a little silly, because your spell power would suck anyway. But I'm saying anything past 50 on either of those stats just seems outrageous, and so I don't think the hex community needs to be so concerned that they're going to be so hurt by this low soul level. And considering the power that hexes have in terms of spell power and utility, there's just really not a need to push the soul level all the way up to 150. I know I've waffled on this issue a bit, but now that I've PvP'd a little more and I've messed around with breakpoints and I've looked at, you know, how things appear, I think soul level 150 is probably on the high side. I mean, now, but that's, if the soul level turns out to be 150, you know, I don't think that's going to ruin the community. I think we will still see build diversity. I think the so-called naysayers, I being one of them, that sort of argue that we'll have no build diversity at 150 soul level, I don't think that's true. I do think there'll be a lot more diversity in how players play and what they do, and it will give, you know, niche builds the opportunity to sort of push deeper. I mean, I would love to have additional vigor on my characters, you know, and all that HP, that's always useful. So, you know, at worst, if I decide to make a dedicated build that doesn't do all this, hit every breakpoint for every stat, at least I'll have a lot more vigor and stuff like that. But that's just my take on it. I know overall I think we should keep the soul level. I do think we should raise it a little bit, though. I think there's enough things to invest in this game that 120 to 125 just, I don't know, it feels on the low end to me. Now, I always prefer it's like higher soul leveling. I mean, I know that in Dark Souls 1, a lot of players preferred to soul level around 100 because they thought there was more specific builds, but I did think that gimped casters really hard in Dark Souls 1. I don't know if it will in Dark Souls 2, but I think to a point, the new game cycle and the new game cycles in this game and bonfire aesthetics and things like that, I think they make the game more challenging. More challenging enough that players will want a higher soul level just to make the single player easier. Not everyone wants to become sort of a mega Dark Souls single player guy and wants to master the game so they can beat it at ultra low soul levels. I think that raising the soul level to the 135-ish, 130 wouldn't just shoot build diversity and might be a little more fun to play. So that's just me. I've looked at some of the math on what these numbers would mean to the PvP community, and I think my opinion is as informed as it can get right now. But my opinion could change drastically based on how important agility/adaptability actually happens to be in the quote-unquote new meta, and I'm not even convinced Dark Souls has that strong of a meta as it relates to other games. I mean, the Dark Souls meta is not as defined as a Dota meta or as a fighting game meta. So those are just my thoughts on the subject, as I said, but I'd like to sort of let's not push the soul level too high. But at the same time, let's not be afraid to maybe raise it a little bit. Those are my thoughts. We'll see what happens. We probably have quite a while before the community actually commits to a particular soul level. So, with that said, I want to move on to the topic of the sorest of feelings, which is the freaking Mega Mule thing. So, I know I've talked about this a little bit before in other videos, but let me clarify what Mega Mule exactly is. Mega Mule is a save file created by a member of the community that has almost all the items in the game at +5, and it has, maximum quantities of all sorts of items, and in some cases over maximum quantities of others. So it's also at soul memory 0. And this was created with the intention of enabling the PvP community to test builds and have builds available to them, immediately at the start of a new character cycle, as opposed to having to, play through the game multiple times to get what they need. And, there's grounds for that. I definitely see. That is definitely a positive. I mean, sometimes playing through the game over and over and over to make a PvP character sucks. That's kind of why I stopped playing on Dark Souls 1, because I'm a resolute anti-Mega Mule guy. I have never muled, even in Dark Souls 1, not in Demon Souls. I'm not about that life. I don't necessarily scorn people who do, so much as I'm saying that it's not for me. And as a result, it takes me a long time to make certain functional character builds in Dark Souls 1. And that's kind of what killed the whole PvP for me, is just making all the builds. So I can see the argument for it to exist. Now, I think taking the time to make those builds is all part of the game and should be part of the game. I'm used to RPGs, traditional RPGs and things like that, where you have to kind of grind out the character you want. I think that's all part of it, but I can see the counter argument. I really can. So the benefits of the PvP community, I think, are a plus. With the added knowledge that the fact that Dom, the creator, didn't put the Mule in New Game Plus, or didn't put the Mule with a high soul memory, is frankly moronic. It is begging the community to grief. I know his arguments were he wanted to enable PvPing right out the get-go, so people who both muled could start fighting right away, and it's just not worth it. He should have just dumped it into New Game Plus. That way, PvP with other New Game Plus players. I think he wanted to reach out to the maximum number of players, but as the game matures, most players will be in New Game Plus, so it just seems very poor to set that character with soul memory 0. It's basically begging to grief, and I'm not making any commentaries on Dom as a person. I don't know him that well, but I do think that a lot of players made a lot of suggestions to him, and he was a little too arrogant to listen to any of them. I'm not saying that makes him a bad guy. He's the one that put the work in to make that Mule, and yes, it does take time to make that Mule. So, I respect that. I think he is an asset to the community, etc., etc., etc. I'm just going to leave it at that. But I am saying that maybe if he had been a trifle less arrogant, maybe we would have came up with an outcome that I found more acceptable. But once again, I'm not the ultimate moral arbiter. I mean, I think that, a lot of players are really happy with how he did it. So, anyway. It's too bad that it does give a bunch of scrubs, and I'm going to say scrubs because if you're using the Mega Mule to get the trophies in this game, I have no time and no respect for you. I'll just throw it out there right away. You don't want to play the game? Don't. I don't know why you'd want a Mega Mule to play a game you don't want to play. So, some other consideration for the Mega Mule, because I've been having these conversations on the forums, like I said. So, it contributes to the griefing, definitely. It does allow for easy build creation and allows players to not waste time with builds they ultimately have to scrap, which I think is great, because I've scrapped about 4 characters because I made them wrong, because there's such limited knowledge. But once again, that's all part of the fun of a new game, and it's kind of how we build our knowledge. People like me, people like most of the community, going out, making legitimate builds, having to scrap them, are the people that provide the feedback to the community so other players won't make those mistakes. So, yeah, this will allow a much more thorough analysis because you can look at all the items and all their effects and what they all look like, but, sometimes trial and error, there's something to be said for it, about discovery as a community, the whole human shared experience. That's sort of the philosophy behind it. I will say that some of the items in Dark Souls 2 are so outrageously hard to get. I mean, most of them aren't going to be defining for builds, but, I mean, some of the Covenant requirements for certain things, like 500 wins, like, are you kidding me? The online isn't active enough. Take the, 4 New Game Plus cycles of natural PvP, probably more. It's just not, it's not plausible, and not for most players, nor should it be. It's just too much. So, I think the Mega Mule does help alleviate some of these outrageous farming requirements. I mean, sometimes farming entire armor sets in this game, that could be like an 8-hour commitment. So if you're a completionist, basically, frankly, it's just going to upset you. It's not going to add any challenge to the game. You're just going to be farming enemies all the time just to say you completed the game, quote unquote. So the counter argument is if you're a completionist, using the Mega Mule won't satisfy you anyway. So I don't know. I'm just saying that I do sympathize with players as it relates to the fact that some items you have to farm by killing a respawning Black Phantom in New Game Plus that only respawns a certain percentage of the time. Are you kidding me? Or trying to farm entire large armor sets from enemies that have limited spawns because, for whatever reason, they decided to put limited spawns in this game, which is another thing that ticks me off. If you want to listen to me vent, I mean, once again, the limited spawns hasn't really affected me a whole lot, but I will acknowledge that as a design choice, I find it questionable, if not downright silly. I hope the limited spawns thing goes away, but... Or, maybe in New Game Plus we could take it away, because the Soul series is divided into this whole New Game Plus system, so I think that making the enemies have unlimited spawns in New Game Plus would actually contribute to the difficulty. And I think at that point it's New Game Plus, so farming souls isn't an issue for anyone. That's my thought. Once again, that'll probably never happen. I think the limited spawns thing is just here to stay, and you can easily get around bonfire aesthetics, etc., but just because there's ways to deal with it doesn't make me believe it was a good feature. I think it was a step in the wrong direction for the series. I think player choice is a huge factor in a successful Souls game. And with that said, I think players should have the opportunity to farm a crapload of souls if they want to, because limiting the spawns essentially only prevents people from mass farming. And frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong with mass farming. This is an action RPG with a level up system. If people want to power level, let them power level. I mean, considering the diminishing returns on so many stats, eventually the power leveling will only take you so far. So that's just me, once again, but I think I'm onto something there. I think I'm making a compelling case for why the respawning enemies is just a silly thing. Let me know what you think in the comments on that one, though, because frankly, I am convinced I am right that the limit on enemy respawns is stupid. I am convinced I am right. So that means someone probably needs to convince me I'm wrong, because there's got to be an argument I'm missing. So let me know in the comments if you're all for the limit on enemy spawns. But I do think it contributes to the Mega Mule problem and the legitimacy of the Mega Mule when you make drops that are in fact finite. If someone puts their time in and puts all their item find gear on and kills an enemy past spawning, they don't get what they want, that's a real drag to burn a bonfire aesthetic and take an area into New Game Plus permanently just to try to get another roll at some items. Like, come on, man. Like, limited spawn on items is just never a good idea, in my opinion. Not for traditionally. This is overwhelmingly. Souls is mostly a single-player game. I mean, why do that in a single-player game? I don't know. So I think that is a big source of the Mega Mule considerations, and it might be the most compelling argument for why the Mega Mule needs to stay. Now, with that said, I am still completely anti-Mega Mule. Screw that thing. But I will acknowledge that that's a pretty good case. Honorable mentions to the worst case, which is, I don't have enough time to farm this gear and play this game. Okay, so don't play it. Like, don't cheat, just don't play. Like, I can respect that, There's times when it's really hard to find the time to do the things that you want. I mean, I know that, we all know that. I think if you have to Mega Mule to play the game because you have so little time, you are, in fact, playing the wrong game. Maybe Candy Crush would suit you better, I don't know. I'm sure that statement's a little jaded, but I mean, really, like, there are games that are most people consider to be quite fun, that are quite casual. Buy Call of Duty. You can throw Call of Duty online and play a whole match in a good 10 minutes and frankly, you'll probably enjoy Call of Duty more the less serious you play it. I mean, the more serious you play a game like Call of Duty, the more you'll dislike it, I think. But once again, that's just me. We've sort of definitely reached the realm of, you know, ego's opinions over things that ego can substantiate. But also, in the comments, if anyone wants to tell me what they think of Titanfall, I was thinking about getting it on PC. I mean, I can't play on PC controls with crap, but I guess Titanfall might be a game worth learning. As much as I like Dark Souls 2, the only other game I have right now that I haven't beaten and mastered that I have any intention of going back to is, you know, Diablo 3, and I have Reaper of Souls, etc., etc. So I'm sure I'll put some time into that, but that won't be making it to YouTube because, to be honest with you, I think I think Reaper of Souls and Diablo 3 kind of sucks. But I have enough friends playing that I sort of enjoy I would enjoy playing it. So we're gonna have the Pursuer boss fight, but I'm not actually going to go silent for this boss fight for a change because, well, A, I lose. But B, because he's arguably a puzzle boss. I mean, you can kill him traditionally, but you can actually kill him with those ballistas in the back of the boss fight. This is old news for almost all players, but in case you're not aware of this, if you can catch him in front of one of those crossbows, those ballistas, you can basically instant kill him with them. So the way most players do that is they parry his strike, and then they shoot him with the ballista. He's very easy to parry, although even if you parry the hit, it doesn't always guarantee you'll be able to shoot him with the ballista. And those ballistas are breakable objects, and he tends to throw like energy blasts at them and stuff like that to get rid of them. So, like I said, it's not necessarily a free win. It's too bad you can't riposte him. I think it'd be cool if they had put in like a special riposte just for him. Maybe if you could only do it on like a great sword, but you could riposte the Pursuer if you had like a great sword. There would be some special animation. I don't know. That almost sounds pretty like juvenile to say. Like, oh, I want to see this completely random, unrelated game feature. Like, yeah, probably should ignore that one, guys. So, anyway, spoiler alert: the Pursuer is going to kill me. I don't play this fight very well, and I'm really overthinking it. I mean, all you really need to do is, I could just throw lightning spears like all the other bosses, but I don't. I also underestimate the arc on some of his attacks. I thought I had a shot here. I was hoping he would... Usually after you parry him, he strafes to the left or the right, and I was hoping he'd strafe to the right. Also, you don't have to parry him to get in front of a ballista. If you can get him in front of the ballista and just catch him in sort of a long attack string, you can shoot him just as easily. So definitely watch out for the sort of the combo he likes to do where he goes up in the air and tries to fall down on you. The last hit on that actually has a lot more range than I ever get a credit for, and it's usually how I wind up dying to the Pursuer when I do, because I underestimate how much range that greatsword has. I've heard that it's maybe not the best weapon for PvP, which I find disappointing. I was hoping it would be a powerful weapon. So here is the special event I talked about. I actually get invaded, and I cannot believe it. I've been invaded twice now, and 20 hours of playing or more, 50 hours of playing at this point probably between deleted characters, you know, and finally I get invaded by an actual player that, you know, I can fight. And that's really exciting. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This is the problem with Mega Mule, and this is the problem with the new invasion system where there's limited red eye orbs. There's not, you know, they're all cracked. There's no just red eye orb to do permanent invasions. Please, FromSoft, please patch in something that doesn't require consumables to invade. That system's always been silly, having a consumable item to force invasions. I mean, there's so many defenses against invasions in this game already. Don't limit invasions, please. And with that, like, you don't get invaded anymore. No one uses the orbs. No one has the orbs. It's early in the game's life cycle, so that might turn around. But once again, negative Mega Mule arguments, like, because it's hard to get red eye orbs for many players, and in many instances, there's not even a vendor that sells an unlimited quantity, to my knowledge. So thus, players have been muling just to get the hack number of, like, what, 6,000 red eye orbs. I mean, I can almost respect that. Like, if someone Mega Mules just the orbs and not one other piece of gear, like, transfers all those orbs to another character or something, like, I there's grounds for that. I was very nervous when this invasion occurred, because this invasion occurred post the birth of the Mega Mule, so I was very concerned this dude would have, like, hacked +5 everything and just one-shot me with his halberd there, but that didn't seem to be the case, although he hasn't landed a hit on me, so there's no way of knowing if he he actually had all the powerful weapons, but it didn't look like he had a fully upgraded shield or fully upgraded armor, so I don't know. So we're going to fight the Pursuer again, and I'm going to go silent this time. There we go, guys. So ends the Pursuer. We will see him again. He is a recurrent enemy in this game, and I gotta say, I'm really satisfied with the Pursuer. Now, I think they could have done a lot more with the enemy. I think they could have made the Pursuer like the thing that we would remember Dark Souls 2 for. I think they should have had him spawn in at random locations at random times, carried by his Raven, and he should have been super scary and challenging and difficult and, you know, prepare to die. And every time the Pursuer showed up, I think it should have inspired fear in players and should have been that thing you're always afraid he'll show up. But he has very few set-ons, locations, and he's not that exciting. So I think he's still cool. I really like him. I like him a lot more than the Stray Demon, but as like a sort of a recurrent character. But they could have done so much with him, and I pray, it's very unlikely, but I hope there's a DLC that utilizes the Pursuer as something pretty sweet. So anyway, your reward for beating the Pursuer, and this fight is completely optional. You don't need to take the Pursuer fight early in the game. I mean, you can circumvent this fight entirely and still proceed in a somewhat natural way through the game. But, I think it's absolutely something you should do as soon as possible, because it'll give you access to this item set down here, which is the Drangleic set, but not only does this set look awesome, but it is the first 100% block shield that you can acquire early in the game. The next most common is the shield you can buy from Blacksmith McDuff, but this is free, it's strong, you probably will never upgrade it, but you'll definitely be grateful for it early game. So, definitely knock out the Pursuer. He's not challenging, definitely one of the easier boss fights of the game, and it gets you great rewards. So we didn't have time to cover some of the things I want to talk about. I want to talk about NPC requirements, which I'm completely against, and I'll talk more about that a little later, but next video rather. But in the meantime, we're wrapping up here. You can come back up here to reach the Lost Bastille, and you should definitely go to the Lost Bastille to at least acquire the key and stuff like that, which will be seen in the next upload. But we're gonna wrap up this time, and so I'll leave you guys with the cinematic. Thanks for watching, and I will see everyone next time.